One of the top questions we get from homeschooling parents is what math should my teenager take next? So whether they're in the eighth grade or they're starting high school, especially then it can be confusing as we're transitioning into the algebra, geometry, and all these courses that don't, if you're not a math person, don't necessarily make sense which way to go. So we call this scope and sequence. Let me just pull open a screen here that should show you us the scope and sequence. This is from an article we'll link down below, but where we walk through scope and sequence for the college bound or not college bound. It doesn't really matter. They start out the same. So what you see here is algebra, geometry, algebra 2 and trig, and calculus. Think about 10th, 11th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. That's basically the sequence that you would see in a public private school or most homeschooling. Some people will do this second approach down here: algebra in ninth grade, geometry in 10th, algebra 2 in 11th, trig and as a senior, or maybe even they start sooner. Uh, so and there's different ways of breaking this up, so it doesn't really matter, but this is the sequence. We always start with algebra and always move into geometry next. How you break up the algebra 2 and trig, whether you do calculus or not, well, that's kind of up to what you're trying to achieve. So that's what we are trying to do here, is just walk through this series of items one after another logically. So that's what I've showed you is the standard. Can there be some differences? Yes. But basically, no matter what you are doing, if you're going to any level of college, they're going to expect to see algebra and probably geometry, even in the liberal art type areas. And even on the job market, algebra is somewhat just kind of your basic and expected. Geometry is a good course. Geometry is actually a fairly easy course to master because it tends to be more visual and more easily understood by most students, as well as long as it's covered well, like we do in Harold Jacobs. We use the Harold Jacobs algebra and Harold Jacobs math courses, or geometry courses, or textbooks, I should say. And those, when we partner those or pair those together with our course content, our video course content, the geometry especially is easy to grasp. And I can't say that's true of all geometry curriculums out there. So, but let's think about why this matters. Why do we care about how we're doing this? And so let me go back up here into the let me go back to the scope and sequence thing here that I had. There we go. And what I've got pulled up is a high school transcript, the template. You can download this. We'll have a download for that down at the bottom of this. But this is what you would want to do. You're going to fill out their name and information here. And this is the transcript, your official transcript. Yours is probably going to look a lot like this. You can download this one. You have the course subject, course title, and completion date. And what we are expecting to see at the university, or anybody else is looking at this, is them be in some logical order. So, for example, if I come over here and look at a filled out example, this does not have English, this just has the math. I expect to see algebra, course subject algebra, and we talk about the fact how to name those in this download. We talk about naming conventions because sometimes parents, we get a little creative. We don't need to be creative here. We expect to see algebra. We expect to see geometry. Probably expect to see algebra 2 or trig, maybe call it pre-calculus. But notice there's the subject, and then there's the course title. Oftentimes people will put the textbook in there, or who they got it from. Elementary algebra with AskDrCallahan. And it just helps the college recruiters or make sense of what you're doing. But notice here they're in order: completed in June in 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021 with the grade. And that's what we expect to see. Now, we would expect to see all of your, freshman year together, your sophomore year together, and things like that. But this is the order that we would expect to see the math in, and that's why it matters. One of the things is a transcript. We are trying to communicate to other people who don't know our son or daughter what has happened. So let's now, with all that in mind, well, let's see if there's and by the way, if we look at the GPA calculator, which also comes down with this, how to calculate your GPA, and this allows you to put things down in the order it would go. And so that's just something else that's part of that download. So, all right, so let's get back to the issue at hand here. Is they just finished pre-algebra, for instance. What they should be in is algebra. Now, I will even add to that, many parents who are coming off 6th grade, 7th grade, and they've done things, and they don't call it pre-algebra all the time, but they can add and subtract and multiply and do some basic graphing and things like that. They are probably ready for just jumping into algebra. Harold Jacobs' algebra that we use in our course could be busted into 2 different terms and be pre-algebra and algebra. And so many parents will do that also. So that's not shown on that, but that's just a choice a lot of parents make because pre-algebra is not really necessary with this curriculum. But if they're done with pre-algebra, they go into algebra. If they're done with algebra, they go into geometry. Some people, well, another question we get a lot is, should we go from algebra 1 to algebra 2 with trig? No, absolutely not. Some people do it, but there is geometry embedded in there. And so geometry is the next flow course. So you don't jump ahead in this until you're confident that you have got the last material. And the ordering of the way curriculum is built is algebra, geometry, algebra 2 with trig, and sometimes, again, we call that pre-calculus. There's different names for it. What we've given you here is that article is a scope and sequence. We'll put a link to that. That's been out there for a long time, and we are also going to, in that we will provide you kind of how it's normally done and a couple of different options. But you don't have to worry about getting this all perfect. What you're looking for is just consistency, right? For many parents, algebra blows up. It takes them longer than expected, so they will transcript it in different ways. They'll say, I'm going to do it over 2 years. I'm going to call 1 year pre-algebra and 1 year algebra 1. That's fine. They may do the same thing with algebra 2 and trig or geometry. I mean, it doesn't matter. What you're looking for is a steady progression, number one, that makes logical sense to somebody. And you're also looking for the fact, does your student understand it? You don't move ahead in math until you understand the last part. That's a mistake. A lot of people say, they think, I'm finished with the book. I did all, X number of chapters. And so now it's time to move forward. No, move forward when they understand it and they feel comfortable with the material. If it takes longer, it takes longer. They'll actually end up better off with that. But this is the scope and sequence to help you think about what is next. Algebra or pre-algebra, and then geometry, and then algebra 2 or trig, and then calculus. That's the order. If you skip around, you can skip some of those things like pre-algebra. You can divide some of those things up, but that's the general order of operations that you want to be. All right. Thank you for your time. See you next time.